Hello, I'm Tracy Lester, the Executive Director of the Center for Fiction. Thank you for joining us. The Center for Fiction is the only literary organization in the country solely dedicated to celebrating fiction and storytelling in all its forms. This year, as we celebrate our 200th anniversary and with our new home in Brooklyn, New York, we know that we have a critical role to play in helping to inform the narrative around social justice, both across the country and around the globe. Tonight's conversation, the carceral system and racial justice, is part of our On America series. The On America series brings writers, journalists, activists, and changemakers together to reflect on the critical issues of our time. In the past, we've hosted discussions on Confederate monuments, the border wall, climate change, and juvenile injustice, to name a few. You can see past events at our website at centerforfiction.org/videos. This evening, you will hear from author and activist Manuel, whose book, My Time Will Come, has recently been published, and Yusef Salaam, whose book, Better Not Bitter, Living on Purpose in the Pursuit of Racial Justice, in conversation with Sarah Burns. You can purchase the books at the link in the chat, and we hope you will support them. And now I'd like to introduce you to Patrick Edge. Patrick is a youth mentor at the Youth Justice Network, and he will introduce the panelists for our program tonight. Patrick.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Edge. I'm from the Youth Justice Network, where I serve as the youth mentor of the Queens location. And Youth Justice Network was formerly known as Friends of the Island Academy, was founded over 30 years ago. Our mission at Youth Justice Networks is to break the revolving door cycle of incarceration and build an equitable justice system by providing young people with an individualized advocacy, mentorship, and opportunities to grow, thrive, and become leaders such as myself. Manuel lives in New York City. He is a poet and motivational speaker at schools and social organizations nationwide. He is the author of the book, My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption. He was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 14, held in solitary confinement for 18 years, and was finally freed as part of the incredible crusade by the Equal Justice Initiative. Full of unexpected twists and turns as it describes struggle for redemption, My Time Will Come is a paean to the capacity of the human will to transcend adversity through determination in art, in Manuel's case, through his dedication to writing poetry. Yusef Salaam is an inspirational speaker and prison abolitionist who at age 15 was one of 5 teenage boys wrongly convicted and sentenced to the prison in the Central Park jogger case. In 2002, the sentences for the Central Park 5 were overturned and all 5 were exonerated for the crime they didn't commit. Yusef now travels the world as an inspirational speaker, speaking about the effects of incarceration and the devastating impact of disenfranchisement. He is an advocate and educator on issues of mass incarceration, police brutality and misconduct, press ethics and bias, race and law, and the disparities in the criminal justice system. Especially for men of color, his memoir, Better Not Bitter, Living on Purpose in the Pursuit of Racial Justice, connects his own story of wrongful incarceration to 400 years of racial injustice and serves as call to action. Our moderator for tonight is Sarah Burns. Sarah Burns is the author of the Central Park 5, a chronicle of the city, wilding, and along with David McCannon and Ken Burns, the producer, writer, and director of the documentary, The Central Park 5. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Patrick and Tracy, and thanks to the Center for Fiction for hosting this event. I'm really thrilled to be here this evening to talk with Yusef and Ian about their extraordinary new books, Better Not Bitter, which you've seen, and My Time Will Come. So welcome, Ian and Yusef. Do you guys want to turn your cameras back on?
Hey, everybody. How you doing? I tell you, it's always a pleasure to share these moments. Hey, Ian, how's everything going?
Hey, how's it going, Yusef? Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you as well.
I just want to start by by acknowledging that I think that despite the trauma of the experiences that you both write about, I think there's also hope in both of these books, in the acts of survival and perseverance and growth. And so I just want to thank you both for having the courage to share your stories with all of us.
Oh, thank you.
I want to start, Ian. Your book opens by describing all the ways in which others in the court system have told your story. They've sort of written your story for you. Um, with this book, you are finally telling it yourself. What does it mean to you to be able to reclaim your own life story?
It means a lot. I mean, as I said, my story had been told so many times by others. I started writing my story in solitary confinement. And then I wrote from age 0 to age 15 when I was first placed in solitary confinement, long-term solitary confinement, that is. And I couldn't write anymore because it became too painful. So I didn't finish it until I got out. But it means a lot to finally be able to tell my truth and not have it distorted by others who wasn't there and don't share my experiences.
And Yusef, we go way back. We first met in 2006, I think, when you agreed to talk to me for a book that I was writing about your wrongful conviction case. But at that time, even as we started talking and doing those interviews, it felt like you weren't ready to truly open up about your story. And so I'm interested in what the journey has been for you to reach this point where you were ready. And I mean, we had lots of conversations about it and a lot, but I feel like this book represents a sort of a new place, in terms of being able to really openly and sort of emotionally share your story.
Yeah, when I first met you, I think for the most part I was hiding in plain sight. We were trying to put one foot in front of the other as members of the then known Central Park Five. And it was tremendously difficult because the city, in many ways, even though we were found innocent, it was a whisper. My mother, she said it so eloquently. It was a whisper. She wondered if the rats in New York City had even heard. The juxtaposition of our innocence got little to no attention to what you see when we were thought to be guilty. Within the first few weeks, 400 articles, perhaps over 400 articles were written about us, tearing apart our lives, criminalizing us, painting a picture of what black and brown bodies were as it relates to the landscape of New York and definitely the world. And people looked at that and they threw the law out of the window. And they said these guys are guilty because they look guilty. And more so, they never really discussed this, but they judged us by the color of our skin and not the content of our character. And it took a long time for me to adjust to the role that I had been placed in, the role of being a person that turns their light up in the world full of darkness, giving people the opportunity to also stand up, to tell their truths, and to be shining examples of what we really should be about. The inequity that we experience, with regards to the system is atrocious. And it causes people to shrink when we should be growing. Psychosocially, we all matter, but the system had been telling us that we weren't worth anything. And for the most part, those of us who believe that false narrative, we begin to move throughout our lives like we are a mistake, even though we were innocent, right? We still were trying to figure out how to walk in the margins of life. And we're supposed to be able to give ourselves permission to be great because we were born on purpose and with a purpose. And so my book is an attempt to give myself back a life that was stolen from me. It's an attempt to honor those individuals that played a really major role in making sure that I was okay. And it's so funny because when you look at today's events, right, here we are on the heels of the anniversary of George Floyd being murdered. And my book shows up right in this time and in this space. And it shows up, I think, right on time, because we need to know that we were born on purpose. We need to know that we have a purpose. We need to know that bigger and more brighter and better than they can define us, we have to define ourselves. And we have to be better and not bitter. Because if we become bitter, just like Nelson Mandela said, it becomes the poison that we drink and expect the enemies that we are looking at to die.
Thank you. You both wrote poetry, which is featured in your books while you were incarcerated. I'm curious for both of you why you turned to poetry as a form of expression, and who were you writing it for? Was this about finding a way to make sense of your own experiences for yourself, or was it about expressing your lives, your inner life to others? I'm curious about what it sort of how it served you and helped you to be able to do that.
Well, for me, I had to dive within the depths of my imagination to survive. You know, growing up in solitary confinement as a 15-year-old child, you know, I went to prison when I was 13 and was placed on long-term solitary confinement at the age of 15, a place I would stay for 18 consecutive Christmases, 18 consecutive years, from the time George H.W. Bush was president to when Barack Obama was on the second year of his first term. To kind of wrap your mind around it. So poetry for me, it started out, someone sent me Tupac Shakur's book, The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And so I started rewriting Tupac's poetry and sharing them with my fellow prisoners. And prisoners are the toughest critics in the world. They're tougher than Simon Cowell. They're tougher than Sandman and on Apollo. If you don't got the gift, don't even expose yourself, because people will tear you down. But I felt like I had something, and I wrote it down and I shared it with the prisoners, and they began to bang on the bike windows. They began to kick on the door. They began to hoop, to holler, to yell and scream with such exuberance that it made me feel like I really had the ability to reach people. And so then I started challenging myself. I started rewriting Langston Hughes. I started rewriting Maya Angelou. I started rewriting other great poets, Eminem, challenging myself to be like setting up obstacle courses in myself. Like, if you can't do this, Ian, if you can't write this poem better than him or her, then you don't have what it takes to be successful. And so I wrote the poetry, and I want to share one of my poems with you now, since we're on the subject. The title of my book, My Time Will Come. It says, I promise you, the brunt of my oppression has a purpose. And this same person that you persecute will one day be worshiped. Though I stand before you bare-chested and shirtless, with my soul and emotions naked, just wanting to be nurtured. Yeah, despite the desperation, desertion, and hurting, my time gonna come. Though I composed this poem not knowing if I'll ever be able to perform it in an auditorium, I do it with the faith of a poet that believes he was born to do it, like an acorn caught up in a storm, flung from the branch where it was born. You can only hold me back for so long. My time gonna come. Despite the difficulties and disappointments, my determination remains undaunted. Though the waters of my tomorrows are deep and uncharted, the buoyance of my character will float unwavering towards them, like a song written yet unrecorded. My time gonna come. Though you wrapped me in chains and sprayed me with chemical flames and did all of the things you did to add to my pain, my circumstances will change. I believe this with the depths of my being, that as long as this world continues to spin, it cannot end till it's been enjoyed by Ian. Remember this day, because things won't always be this way. My time gonna come. My time gonna come. against all conceivable odds, my time will come.
Wow.
Thank you.
When did you write that?
I wrote that poem in 2011 or 12 after the United States Supreme Court overturned all juvenile life sentences, and I went back for resentencing, and they gave me 65 years in place of my life sentence and sent me back to prison. I went back with a fighter spirit, saying, I'm not gonna die in this cell. I'm gonna continue to fight.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing it with us.
You're welcome.
Yusef, you also are a poet. How did that sustain you?
You know, poetry for me was really a way for me to journal my experience. My mother had been telling me all along that I needed to write down all of the things that was going on. I needed to talk about the smells, the way that the sky looked in these difficult times. And I just couldn't find the energy to do that, right? But what I did was I did write poetry, but really it was because I wanted to be a hip hop artist, right? My first poem that was in front of the world, so to speak, was I Stand Accused. And it was my opportunity to say last words before they sentenced me, because I felt like I was never going to be able to speak again. And so I said what I said, and I was looking around the courthouse, and just for me, I felt so energized. When I think back at that moment, you know, to interrogate myself enough to be able to describe what was going on. You know, here it is, the judge is asking me if I have anything to say before they sentence me. And I stand up, and as I stand up, all of a sudden, those individuals that vilified me, that criminalized me, they all began to shrink as I grew right before them. And I found that with the poetry that I was writing, especially in prison, it became more succinct. But it was those moments where I felt the worst, that I could read those poems, and those poems would pump new life back into me. And so when I read the poetry that I wrote called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, it was an ode to, you know, of course, the last poets and Gil Scott-Heron. And for me, it was like, even though now a lot of folks are talking about the revolution will be televised, we see a lot of this stuff happening on social media, I truly believe that the truth of everything is still being controlled. We won't really see what it is that when my professor, Marimba Ani, said to me, she said, you know, if we decided tomorrow that their system of oppression ceases to exist, their system of oppression will cease to exist. And how is that? It happens because we unify, but we're so divided as a people. We don't even see ourselves as the kaleidoscope of the human family, but we are, right? When we read the Constitution and it says we the people, all of us believe that we're talking and reading about us. But when we go back into the history of when that document was created, we know without a shadow of a doubt, Black and brown bodies were not considered whole human beings. We were considered 3/5 of a human being. So in today's age, we are the people. And in today's age, as we begin to unify around the humanity around us all, we give ourselves the overwhelming opportunity to be great. And so I guess Ian did it, so I gotta do it as well, right? I'm not gonna do I Stand Accused. I'm actually going to be releasing. Oh man, this is some great stuff. So when they, Better Not Bitter is out, and in Better Not Bitter is the poem I Stand Accused. I actually, and this is just a teaser, I actually was in a music studio, and we cut the track I Stand Accused to some really amazing sounds, and I can't wait to share that with the world as well.
Wow.
So I'm not going to do that piece yet, but I will do. Matter of fact, I'm not going to do The Revolution Will Not Be Televised either. I'm going to do a poem that I wrote when I was walking down the corridor in Clinton, Dannemora. And when I was walking down the corridor, all of a sudden I felt this overwhelming sense to write, and I asked somebody to give me a napkin. This is the only poem I ever wrote that had never been revised. And I felt like I was being used as a vessel for this word to come through. And it's called I'll Meet You in Between Venus and Mars. In between Venus and Mars is the center of our attraction. Of those connected to the stars, hardly a fraction. It behooves man to work for the day when this will all end. Life is mortal, so follow the ways of those heaven sent. Awaken and receive that which will give you life, or remain horizontal and never begin the flight. For the solution, I'll descend from amongst the stars, and I'll meet you in between Venus and Mars. I thought about that, and often, here we were on stages, right? We were in front of hundreds of people, perhaps thousands of people, as they watched the Central Park 5 documentary. Hundreds of thousands of people read the book, The Central Park 5, A Chronicle of a City Wilding. And never in my wildest imagination would I ever think that I would be gracing stages famous, right? I was infamous. We were the pariahs. We were considered the scum of the earth. People wrote damning letters about us. Donald Trump took out full-page ads calling for the state to kill us. Pat Buchanan, on the heels of that, then writes, well, why don't we just take the eldest one and hang him from a tree in Central Park? If we look at books like Savage Portrayals by Natalie Byfield, we'll get the opportunity to really understand the language that was being used to create a situation. And that situation was a situation that they wanted to turn us into modern day Emmett Tills. And when I look at the poem, that particular poem in general, or specifically, I should say, I'm talking about I'll descend from amongst the stars. How could I ever known that I would be in a space where I would be traveling the world, sharing my story of resilience, calling Cardi B the great philosopher because she said, knock me down 9 times, I'll get up 10. And that's the mantra of our lives, right? The pressure that's placed upon us is to make us into these beautiful diamonds that we're supposed to be. Just like my friend Jimmy Gardner said, he did 27 years in prison. He said, thank God we don't look like what we've been through.
Yes, Lord.
And I think that that's the testament of what this truth is about. I look at my case in particular and all of it, right? I say to myself, wow, people always say, how did you survive that? And I said, this case had the hand of God written all over it. Many of our cases do. And I said this case in general, because it was so widely and it was like, it wasn't just a New York case. And it really wasn't just a case that was in America, because my mother was telling me people as far as China was writing to her about this case. This case was such a case that, the outcome was that we were supposed to receive a social death. That's what the outcome was. We weren't supposed to survive. First of all, we weren't supposed to survive prison. And we were supposed to receive a social death had we survived at all. But look at God. I say in my book that the Central Park jogger case is actually a love story between God and his people. It's a story of a criminal system of injustice placed on trial and toppled in order to produce a miracle in modern time. It's a story of how a people can be brought low only to rise because the truth can never stay buried. And it's a story of a people who have been buried alive and forgotten. The system forgot we were seeds. And instead of a social death, we've emerged like the phoenix from the ashes, because as they built the fire to consume us, they forgot the owner of the heat. I mean, it's so poetic, right? You can only understand it when you look back and you say to yourself, my God, when you're going through it, it's hell. But the only way to get through hell is by keep on walking, And it's funny because in the introduction of my book, I talk about how they didn't know who they had. But really, I also talk about how I didn't know who they had either. And so I had to grow and develop through this process. It wasn't just something that I was going to go through, but I found out that it was something that I was going to grow through.
Thank you, Yusef. That the point of you saying they didn't know who they had really struck me. That Ian, you also wrote, "I was someone," and to me, those felt. I think there's a really important theme throughout both of your stories and these books about identity and sort of how you can understand who you are and kind of try to maintain some of your own identity in the face of these incredibly dehumanizing conditions in this space that is designed to kind of strip away your identity. I was really struck. I mean, I think, we all know that our criminal justice system is broken, or at least we would say it's working exactly as it was designed, and that itself is the problem. And you've both written about the ways that the prison experience is dehumanizing, just the injustices. I mean, from the larger injustice of it, but also the kind of daily injustices of, the capriciousness of prison officials, the lack of even the pretense that rehabilitation is a goal. I was really struck, Ian, you wrote about how you didn't, when the lawyers from the Equal Justice Initiative came to take your picture, and you wanted to see that picture because you didn't know what you looked like because you hadn't seen a mirror in years. And just what that means to your own, I mean, that just knocked me over, that you're that removed from your identity that you don't know. I mean, you were robbed of your identity there. And we're in this moment now, here tonight, a year and a day after the murder of George Floyd. We're having some real conversations about criminal justice reform, about decarceration, about defunding the police. And I think for both of you, two people who have directly experienced the injustices of this system and the way that it is dehumanizing, the way it strips you of your identity, I know this is a big question, but I am interested to hear from both of you how you think it needs to change. What does a true system of justice look like?
I, I, I'll go first. I think that for me, I used to say prison reform, criminal justice system reform. But recently, I was doing one of these presentations, and one of the moderators, that a good friend of mine, said that we should be moving toward prison transformation and criminal justice transformation, not reform. Don't tinker with it, just get rid of it and rebuild it from a whole new spectrum, right? And that kind of opened my eyes to something. But I believe me and Yusef each have issues that we're passionate about, things that get us hyped. And one of the things for me is this solitary confinement for a juvenile should be eradicated. Placing a child in solitary confinement for 18 years, as in my case, is just cruel and unusual punishment. It should have never happened. And in fact, the United Nations says that holding a human being in solitary confinement for longer than 15 days is considered torture. So I think there needs to be a cap placed on solitary confinement for adults, if you have to have it at all, that it should not be utilized for children, and that this law in Florida that still on the books to this day that says a child of any age that's indicted for a life or death felony shall be treated in every respect as if they were an adult. That law should be wiped out, because that means a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8, 9, 10, it doesn't matter. And Florida's not alone, but they stand out to me because that's where I was arrested at. And what's ironic about me and Yusef hosting this event tonight is the fact that I grew up in a place called Central Park. I talk about it in my book. And Yusef, even though he's not from Central Park, because it's a lot different in New York, will forever be attached to that word, But those are some of the issues that I'm passionate about And I think we need to completely transform solitary confinement and the age limitations for juveniles.
You know, as I was thinking about my remarks, I couldn't help but think about a film that Michael Moore did called Where to Invade Next, I think it was. And in this film, he was exploring other nations and their prisons that they had, the school systems that they had, and things of that nature. And I think it was interesting to note, and I'm not sure if he said this, but I definitely thought it, that here we are, the youngest nation in the world. They would like to imagine that we all immigrated to this country, but that's not the truth. But for those of us who have immigrated to this country, the places that we come from humanize their inmates. See, in America, we have a huge problem. And the problem that we have in America, it really states that we are about penalizing the black and brown body. We are about penalizing anyone who looks like they don't belong to the status quo. And the worst part about it is I was looking in my other book, Punching the Air. There's a passage that I write in here with Evie Zaboy called African American 2. And we say, while we talk, shout, whisper, Imani writes on her poster board, the 13th Amendment. Then she writes some more words. Dr. Benu nods. Y'all should know this, he says. Y'all really should understand this. Constitution of the United States of America, 13th Amendment, Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. When George Floyd was murdered, the language that I remember using prior to his murder was language about, it was really about Band-Aid fixing. You know, the system is broken. Like maybe they just don't know that this is happening and we need to expose this. We need to talk to the heartstrings of the people in charge. And then George Floyd got murdered. And our ancestors' wildest dreams poured out into the streets. The young people, the people who are the most fearless, poured out into the streets. And the language that they were using was language like defund, language like abolition. And the worst part about what happened, I think, is that because we didn't own the airwaves, the conversation began to be defined by the people who did. And so tremendous fear began to take over. What are these young people talking about? How can we defund the police? Because what was being planted as a seed in the hearts and minds of the people was they're talking about living in a state of lawlessness, of no system. And that's absolutely not what was being said at all. What we are talking about is living in a system, as Ian so brilliantly said, that is transformative. Because if we stay with what we have, we will continue to get what we got. One person in prison for a crime that they have not committed is one person too many. And I want people to understand this, right? If you consider the Central Park jogger case just as one example, here you have 5 individuals, myself included, go to prison for a crime they don't commit. And we all do someone else's time. We all finish that. We finish parole. And we're piecing our lives back together. And Corey Wise is the only one that is still in prison, hoping for a miracle, praying for a miracle. He bumps into Matias Reyes. Second time he meets this individual. This time Matias Reyes, as he says in his own words, he had been going to church and trying to atone for all of the sins that he had committed. And then he sees Corey in the prison. And he says, oh my goodness, I have to tell the truth. He then tells the truth about Corey. Corey is the magic ingredient who was never He was never a suspect, but he was the one who freed us all. But if you consider the case, in 1989, 13 years prior to that, our families, our supporters, our communities were out in the streets and they were saying, these guys didn't do this. We know our children, right? Mayor Koch at the time, he said, every grandmother says, my child is a good boy. And he said something like, you better believe it. He went on to say something like, you know, people want to see what the criminal justice system is like. And we'll be able to see what that's like with this case, the Central Park jogger case. Because they got stuck with the wrong people, the real perpetrator was out committing more crime. There was a young pregnant Latina woman, Lourdes, I forget her last name, but Lourdes is her first name.
Gonzalez.
Lourdes Gonzalez. She would have been alive today had the system said, hold on, these guys aren't making any sense. I mean, come on, we're seasoned professionals. We've been on the job for at least 20 years. They're lying to us. They're telling us it happened over here, happened over there. We picked up Raymond and Kevin the night that this incident happened, and they have no blood on them. These were the pants. I don't know if you saw this, Sarah. These were the pants that I was wearing on April 19th, 1989. I just got these back from my attorneys not too long ago.
Wow.
These were the pants. I'm over 6 foot tall. And so here I was in Central Park with these pants on. And as you can see, there's artwork all over it. There's no blood on these pants. And they made the people believe that we had done this heinous crime, even though there was no DNA evidence. And I hate to say that word that way because I feel like when people hear it, if you're not familiar with DNA, you feel like it's just this flimsy thing. I like to say the big word, deoxyribonucleic acid. That was not there. There was proof that we hadn't done this crime, but it was too attractive for them to go a different way because they needed to keep this narrative, the narrative of fear, the narrative of despair, and then the narrative of hope, that they caught the culprits and they caught them quickly, but they didn't. And so Matias Reyes was still out there committing more crime. One of his last victims, at this time, his modus operandi was that he would give his victims a choice, your eyes or your life, meaning he would, after he did this heinous thing to them, he would ask them, do you want to live? And if you wanted to live, he would cut your eyes out. And if you couldn't live without your eyes, he would kill you. Then at this point, he was just killing all of his victims. But I want to paint the scene just for a second. If we can imagine Matias Reyes barging into Lourdes Gonzalez's home. She's a young, pregnant Latina woman. She's there with her 2 children. She senses that this is going to be a bad day, but she probably thinks that she's going to survive. So she pleads with Matias Reyes, can I just put my children in the next room? And he allows her to do so. She comes out resigned that she's going to have this terrible experience, but she's probably going to survive. And he then rapes her, and because at this point he wasn't giving his victims a choice, he stabs her to death. The tenants in the building heard her cries for help and came out of their homes, and they held him until the police came. She could have been alive today. He killed her and her unborn child. She could have been alive today enjoying her family. Her husband could have been enjoying her and their unborn child together. But because the system got it wrong. And I'm saying this because this is just one case, right? The Central Park jogger case is a case I believe that represents the microcosm of the macrocosm of cases just like it. If the Central Park jogger case happened, and we know that it did, and we know that the Innocence Project as an organization has been working tirelessly to get people free through DNA evidence, trying to get them exonerated. Some people have been in prison that they have been that have been freed through their work for upwards of 40 years. And then they found out that these guys didn't do it. I'm saying we have more than just a problem. There's a sick, sadistic idea that has been running around in the system. Even the system of oppression that we experience. This system of oppression is not what most people think. They think that we're on the brink of a race war, that, you know, it's black against white. That's absolutely not what's going on. Because if you look in the rest of the world, people who are being oppressed look like people who are oppressing them. What we're really seeing is the fight that we are fighting against is a fight against spiritual wickedness in high and low places. That's where we're really fighting. And so the transformative system that has to be born as a result of all of the trauma that we've all experienced, it has to happen. And the only way it's going to happen is that we have to dream that impossible dream. We have to dream with our eyes wide open. We have to be able to have an imagination that is so brilliantly clear that the law of attraction makes it so. And we're right there. All we have to do is lean in a little bit more. All we have to do is lock arms together and just make it happen.
Thank you. I want to go to the audience for some questions. I have one from an audience member. Can you speak to how you maintained your humanity under such dehumanizing conditions?
So with me, it was interesting because I talk about it sometimes. I remember when I was sitting, you know, I'm going to say I was sitting in the Oprah Winfrey show. Well, you know, I was sitting on stage with Oprah Winfrey with the rest of my brothers. And I remember she asked me, she said, Yusef, how did you get through this? And I said, I meditated. And that wasn't, to me, it was like, it was too short of an answer to really espouse what I really did. But I often prayed. And they say when you pray, it's like you're talking to God. And then I would meditate, but instead of meditating with nice music playing in the background, incense burning, my legs crossed, perhaps some white noise, you know, the proper conditions that you would imagine meditation to be under, I had to meditate while I was walking through the corridors, while killers were looking at me, while rapists were looking at me, while murderers were looking at me, while people who wanted to harm me were looking at me. And I had to understand that the energy that I projected outside of myself had to let them know that there was a brightness inside of me that was not to be allowed to be dimmed. And there was a sacredness in that, right? And I think that even the first 6 months after I was in prison, there was an officer that walks up to me, and I wrote about this in my book of poetry. He said to me, very simply, he said, "Who are you?" This question changed the trajectory of my life. And in the answer that I write in my book of poetry, very succinctly, I say, searching to find who has come, a beautiful soul, a powerful one. When I answered him, I said, I'm Yusef Salaam, one of the guys they accused of raping the Central Park jogger, but I didn't do it. And to my surprise, he said, I know that. He said to me that he had been watching me and I wasn't supposed to be there. He asked me again, why are you here? Who are you? The deep dive that he was pushing me into to go into the rabbit hole was something that I could have never imagined, but something that I needed. It was that spark that caused me to remember that I was born, that when my mother and my father got together, I was one of over 400 million options racing to the egg, and I was chosen. So that is a miracle in and of itself. But I think looking at all of that stuff, right, remembering what my mother said to me in that moment that she had with me, where she said, that they needed me to participate in whatever it was that they were trying to do. She said, do not participate, refuse. And I think that that's the truth of life, right? Life will always be trying to tell you a false narrative about who you are and what you're supposed to be. But when you find out who you are, when you find your purpose, just like Dr. King said, do it as if God himself called you to do it at this very moment. And as I always say, instead of giving us a grand idea of what purpose is, maybe a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or something like that, he said, if your purpose in life is to be a street sweeper, sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Leoton Price sang before the opera. Be excellent. Like Beethoven composed music, be excellent. And that's what we have to be. We have to be able to know that we matter. Psychosocially, we matter. And once we believe that we matter, we will begin to turn our light up. We will begin to turn our voices up. We will begin to straighten our backs. That's what I had to learn in prison, and I had to use that as my guide as I walked through all the way to the end. And I'm still using that.
Wow. Ian, I wonder if you could speak to that also. I mean, I think it was interesting what Yusef was just saying about his mother's advice not to participate. Because I think you also, I mean, you write about the sort of the ways that you were trying to, I think, resist this sort of determination of the prisons to break you. How did you survive that? How did you try to maintain your humanity in that space?
Oh man, that's such a tough question. Um, because I use several things to survive. I speak of in my book when my mother used to say, as a little boy, as if there was something I had to watch out for in the future, she'd say, Ian, no matter what, don't let them take your mind. You're brilliant. Baby, don't let them take your mind. And she used to embed this into me repeatedly, like there was this big bad monster coming to take my mind. But I used to recall those conversations when I was in solitary, right? I thought about, despite the tumultuous relationship I had with my mother, she embedded that into me. Me diving. I believe God gives each and every one of us a gift, and some of us more than others. And I believe that my gift, one of them, is the ability to compose words in ways that move people, right? It helps with whatever purpose I was born for. Sitting in solitary, I had a lot of one-on-one conversations with God. I did feel different. I've had officers, just speaking of what Yusuf was just saying, officer, like, who do you think you are, Manuel? You are an inmate. They try to strip you of your identity and make you look. That's why they cut your hair just like everybody else. But God made us different. That's why we each have different fingerprints, right? If God wanted us to be the same, all of us would have the same fingerprints, But man, it was just that, and just me believing that I was born for a different. I started reading, for example, when I first went to prison, I was reading urban novels, Donald Goines, Iceberg Slim. But then my mind evolved, and I started reading spiritual books like The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav, or The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Things that help move my spirit and not just my mind. And so I would say it was my constant belief that I was born with a purpose, man, and that I was not going to die in prison, and I was going to get out of prison and live and fulfill my dreams.
Thank you for sharing that, both of you. I'm going to see, I think we just have a couple more minutes, so I want to briefly ask one more question from the audience. Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. We have someone who must be a teacher, I'm guessing, saying we are asking our students currently, what will you use your freedom for? What would you tell them freedom is for?
My God. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna just really say it quickly. I was listening to Nas, one of my. I love Nas. I love the artistry that he brings as a rap artist, right? And he said something like, as soon as I tell the people to go free, it's going to be just a couple of days before they come and get me. Freedom is for you to go free. Freedom is for you to believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are a child of God, that you are undeniably supposed to be here, that there is a space for you. And as you live in that freedom, you have to know that you have to remove yourself from the law of lack into the law of abundance. There is enough. There will be enough. You will be provided for. And you have to move through life and understand that you begin to become lucky because you will labor under correct knowledge. So luck is an acronym that gives you a lucky life. And fear is an acronym that allows you to become fearless, because fear means false evidence appearing real. Conquer your fears. Live as free as you can. And as my good friend Les Brown says, live full and die empty.
Ian, do you have any thoughts on that? Just I guess really, in some ways, it's just what does freedom mean to you now?
I mean, I've been described. People have asked me to describe what was obtaining my freedom like after 26 years of incarceration, and the only thing, the closest thing I can think of for you guys in society to get it, who's never been incarcerated, just imagine escaping a burning building with your life.
Wow.
Just imagine that, and that's what freedom feels like to me.
Mm.
One last quick thing, Ian, can you tell us a little bit about what life has been like since then? Your book sort of takes us through your experience while incarcerated, but I'm interested in what you're up to now.
Great question. So, the Equal Justice Initiative with Brian Stevenson is very instrumental in my life. They helped me sort of with the reentry process. They assigned lawyers to teach me how to open a bank account, how to, try to learn how to drive a car. I still don't know how to drive a car. I still don't know how to cook. I'm an Uber Eats guy.
You live in Brooklyn, so you can get away with that.
Right.
No
right.
driving, no cooking. It's right.
Right. But I mean, I got a lot of things. I mean, I'm in discussions now about the movie for my life. There's also the fact that I did an op-ed in the New York Times that came out right before my book did about solitary confinement and how it affected me. I'm in development of possibly hosting my own show to expose the criminal justice system on a larger scale, because I always felt like I had that type of story and gift that if I could just be exposed more to the masses, that we could do something to affect lasting change.
And okay, we have like 1 minute. Yusef, someone also asked in the Q&A if you could explain the poster behind you. I think they're speaking about the Donald Trump ad, which I see over your shoulder there. If you want to just quickly explain the meaning of that piece behind you.
Absolutely, because I gotta hop, unfortunately, and jump on another Zoom call in like a few seconds. Donald Trump paid $85,000 to call for the death penalty to be reinstated specifically for my case. And you think about $85,000, that was a lot of money in '89. That's a lot of money now. A lot of people don't make $80,000, $85,000. But he utilized this tool, which he basically created this ad and was able to publish it 2 weeks after we were accused. And in that moment, it was almost as if the whisper was there. Hey, listen, go get him. thank God we survived that and we're still here. But that's what this ad is about. And I remind myself every day. Got it from the New York Times, and yeah. But thank you.
Thank you. We do have to wrap up now, but I want to thank you both just for sharing this with us, for being here tonight. I'm glad to know you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sarah. And
Thank you, Yusef. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, Sarah. Very moving. Please buy their books, support the work that they're doing. We'll drop the links in the chat again. You can also donate to Youth Justice Network, who are working with incarcerated youth now. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.